So I hit my 8 week cannabis cessation target, and then I've had I've used it 2 or 3 times in the past week, I think. Small amounts each time, but um, I relapsed. I'd sort of factored that in when I started because with it being a 50-year habit, it did seem perhaps overly optimistic and possibly even harmful just to stop cold turkey. But nonetheless, I think it's a serious matter because, of course, not doing something is rather easier than doing it a small amount, trying to moderate, which is possibly another option. But the reason for the relapse was not, and from my own perspective, it was not a craving for weed or for cannabis really at all. It was just this soul crushing depression that had come upon me, and I couldn't seem to shake it. And when I find a day of this kind of level of depression, I tend to reach for alcohol to relieve it. And alcohol does give temporary relief, but alcohol um, has quite negative effects on my blood pressure and various things, and give me a headache and this sort of stuff. And anyway, the effect is quite short-lived. Whereas I found that a small amount of my edible cannabis butter uh, gave me more than 24 hours relief. I just started to be able to relax again, and so I repeated that gesture on 3 separate days, over about a week or 10 days. I think I would say I've repeated it again. It was always because of this depression, which I just found to be overwhelming. I seemed to have no defense against it. So whether it's that the depression should be so intense after 8 weeks of abstinence, I don't know whether that's a pharmacological reaction, or what did happen is that I had a series of life event challenges that occurred over the past few days that I already put me on a very depressive path. And also, I think one other thing that happens is, because I'm looking more realistically, I suppose, at my life, I'm no longer escaping. I'm looking at, what effect has this prolonged usage of this mind-altering substance? What have I been escaping from? And what does my life look like? And I've been living alone now for 15 years. I've just had my 69th birthday. I separated from my wife, as I say, about 15 years ago. I had a couple of opportunities to form new relationships, but I just found it very difficult to commit to anything like that. I felt that I valued my independence, and I didn't want to become responsible for another person, which is what both of those things would have entailed. But of course, now looking back, I realise that perhaps I was certainly foolish. I begin to wonder how accurately I've been gauging my reactions, my responses to the world around me for years, really now, um, because I'd always assumed that the substance that I was taking was harmless, or if anything, giving insight. But now, as I been following this path and looking at testimonials of psychosis resulting from prolonged cannabis use and so on and so forth. Looking at it from the other side of the picture, and people had always told me, I'd often heard, well, it'll destroy your brain cells, but I thought it was, I didn't really take it seriously. Um, but obviously there is something in it, and with my prolonged usage, I mean, maybe it's completely um, upset my entire kind of um, mental metabolism, if there is any such thing as that. I don't know. Um, I think I used it for a long time to keep depression at bay. I'd I'd use weed, and the day just became fun. Quite tolerable. I play guitar. Get absorbed in the Bible, or watch a movie, or some task around the house, and um, I was quite happy. But ultimately, it's always looking for something outside of myself, I think, to create that happiness, that feeling of contentment. And the social isolation is very real. I find it very difficult to form stable relationships anyway. And I think that I'd fallen into a very low state of mental um, tranquility, about mental state, about 18 months ago, when I had become ill. I had a prolonged illness and fever, and couldn't seem to shake it. And I had a cleaning lady who was coming around at the time, and I think she saw the state that I was in, and she very kindly started to come round and invite me to go for a walk here or for a walk there, and so on and so forth. So again, it was an external pick me up, and I relied very greatly on that. But of course, I was always in this altered state of consciousness, which might have explained why I had really perhaps too readily misinterpreted her gestures as having a possible romantic side. I did like her, a lot, and I thought that I was led to believe that we were in some sort of a relationship. But she was acting as an unofficial nurse, I suppose. I don't know. I mean, I was only paying her to clean the house, but I certainly didn't pay her when we went out together, although I would sometimes buy lunch, but I mean, with small amounts. But so that when I began to perceive that, or when it became clear that was a relationship that was not going to form, I felt compelled to ask her not to come any longer, because I thought we'd crossed. It was as though we'd what do they call it in theatre? Breaking the third wall or something like that. It was no longer, a relationship of me as an employer and her as a cleaner. It had segged into something more. I wasn't personally responsible for that. It was her repeated invitations and gestures that did that. But I followed very gladly, and I felt quite encouraged that I had she's a very charming lady, and young lady as a friend and companion. But it wasn't to be, and of course, I knew that when I asked her to stop coming, it would probably herald the onset of some depression, because my loneliness had been proceeding for a long time. I'd learned to live with it, but this was like it felt it was a great blow to me, and I tried to rally, and I stopped using the weed shortly after. Actually, it was probably quite a difficult moment anyway. But I managed 8 weeks, which I'm very pleased about. And then after 8 weeks of sobriety, then my wife and I are still very friendly, and she came to stay at my house for 4 or 5 days with a lady friend of hers, and it was, although we don't see eye to eye on hardly anything, but of course we lived together for 30 years, and we have a child together, my daughter, and having some people in the house and having my wife there with whom I have an intimate, close relationship. Although we're not lovers, as it were, but we certainly have an intimate relationship still. She knows me very well. I know her very well. Inevitably, once you've lived with somebody for all those years. So it was although I was slightly worried about the what it was going to be like, and I tried to escape from it to some extent, but after a while of being there, I began to feel so much more relaxed, that the house was no longer empty. My digestion problems seemed to ease, so there's obviously a level of anxiety, and just hearing other voices, and being able to share a word over breakfast, which is what I just looked forward to so much. So then, of course, there came the day when they left, and the house, which had been empty for 15 years except for myself, was suddenly much emptier. And the days passed, and after about 3 days from that event, I just fell into such a funk of low mood and depression. I felt I'd already stopped playing guitar. There just seemed to be nothing, and that's the first time that I used a small amount of cannabis, and it really lifted my mood tremendously. Gradually, it took several hours. I don't smoke. It's only inedible. I took what I would consider to be a small amount, but it really just eased the tension so greatly, and the effect continued for more than 24 hours. I wasn't, I don't think I was inebriated particularly for a short period, perhaps so, but generally speaking, I just had this sense of calm and tranquility. And then again, I had there were another couple of events that I won't bore everybody with, but just letdowns, disappointments that happened in the space of the next 3 or 4 days, and each time this wretched black dog depression just gripped me, and I tried to avoid the weed, and I reached for the bottle. I mean, I'm not proud of any of these things, but that's how I've learned to deal with these sorts of situations, self-medicating all the time. So that's the situation now. I mean, I'm sober today. I'm intending to stay that way. I feel okay. I don't have any, yearning, burning to be inebriated at all. In fact, I've become, if anything, even warier of the effect. I don't think I could go back to regular use now. I've become quite. I've become more conscious of the risks, and so I would be pleased to proceed with my sobriety. But I'm beginning to think I do need some kind of support system. And the main thing that I miss is just having somebody to talk to. And so I'm not quite sure how to go about that. I mean, I'm not the easiest person to get along with. And I have quite a low tolerance for what should we say, charity, as it were, charitable organisations and stuff. But maybe a self-help group could be the way to go. I just don't know. My friend, the very few friendships that I had were again, they were very much people who were using weed and using alcohol regularly, and I haven't felt. I've wanted to be away from that. I didn't want to slip back into that kind of ambient, as it were. So, I'm more alone than ever before. I don't have any sober friends. And now, looking around at my life, I wonder, well, one of the reasons maybe that I am so alone is because people were unable to form relationships with somebody who was constantly inebriated. I don't know. It's a chilling thought, but I'm trying not to get too chilled. I mean, I am, after all, getting on in years, and it's just a question of how to best organise my time and my life from now on. But I'm doing it more consciously, and I'm intending to resume my sobriety, but I'm not going to beat myself up against over this lapse, and nor am I going to return to the constant daily use that had become the routine. I don't feel comfortable doing that any longer. So that's just an update anyway, and if there's any change in that, I'll let people know. I think it's important that we should share these things, because of course I know a lot of other people are involved in cessation efforts, and having to deal with lapses, and having to deal with different psychological issues as they proceed. And I wish everybody all the very best in those efforts. I think they're doing a valiant thing, and may the Lord bless you all.